Welcome! You've read the title and looked at the thumbnail. Go get your favorite drink. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell if you like scary stories, and support us with the like button so we can continue providing more horror and mystery. Now, let's begin. Thomas was a young man in his 20s, coming from a small village sandwiched between mountains and plains. He had lived his entire life in a modest home with his parents and younger siblings. The family was struggling with financial hardship. Their father's hard work in the fields barely made enough money to survive. Thomas had always dreamed of leaving that village, simply to fulfill his ambition of completing his university studies and becoming the first member of his family to earn a higher degree. His journey to the city was not easy. He had saved what little money he could over the years by working in the harvest seasons, and bid farewell to his family early in the morning as fog enveloped the village like a white shroud. He sat on the bus for hours, contemplating the winding road separating his village from the city. The closer he got, the more he felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. When he finally arrived, he found himself in the middle of a bustling city, unlike his hometown. Cars whizzed by, people passed by without even a glance, and bright signs covered the streets. He carried his old suitcase and started looking for a place to stay, but the prices were high and he had little in his pocket. Thomas tired of searching until his luck led him to an old building on a semi-dark side street. It was a small hotel, its facade cracked, and its windows looked as if they hadn't been opened for years. Yet there was something about it that drew him in, as if beckoning him inside. He pushed open the creaking wooden door and entered the lobby. The smell of old age and dust filled his nostrils, and the dim lighting made the place seem frozen in time. Behind the reception desk sat a middle-aged man, his features mysterious and his face cold. Thomas said hesitantly, "Sir, I'm looking for a room at a reasonable price. I don't have much money, but if you lower the price, I'll stay for a whole month." The hotelier paused for a moment, then smiled mysteriously and said, "Don't worry, son. You can stay for a whole month. Pay when the month is up." Thomas froze in place. The offer seemed like a dream. He hadn't expected to get a room like this. He thanked the man profusely, feeling temporarily relieved, as if his worries had been removed. However, what he didn't know was that first night in the hotel would be the beginning of a nightmare he would never forget. Thomas climbed the wooden stairs, which creaked with every step, as if the building was groaning under his weight. He stood in front of his room's door, inserted the key the innkeeper had given him, and pushed the door open slowly. As soon as he entered, he froze. The room wasn't what he'd imagined. It was relatively spacious, with an old, half-broken window, 2 peeling walls, and 2 rusty iron beds in the middle. On one of the beds was a young man, roughly his own age, sitting silently, staring down at the floor. Thomas approached cautiously and said in a low voice, "Hello, I think we'll share a room." The young man slowly raised his head, only giving a brief nod in response. He looked pale, his eyes sunken, and his silence was more disturbing than reassuring. Thomas felt uneasy, but not wanting to create any tension, he placed his bag next to the other bed and began to prepare for his first night in the city. As night fell, silence fell over the place. The street outside the hotel was almost empty, and the wind whipped the shutters. Thomas sat on his bed, trying to read by the light from his phone, but he noticed that the lamp hanging from the ceiling wasn't working. He sighed in frustration, turned off his phone to save its battery for the next day, and then stretched out on the bed, determined to sleep early so he could wake up in the morning and go to the university to submit his papers. As he laid his head on the pillow, he felt something strange. There was a sense of another presence in the room, one heavier than just a silent roommate. He stared into the darkness, but the room was completely black, and he could no longer make out the other bed. Suddenly, he saw a shadow passing in front of the bed toward the door. His entire body went rigid, his heart pounding wildly. He tried to convince himself that it was just his imagination or a trick of his tired eyes. But suddenly, he heard the sound of breathing very close. So close that he could feel its heat on his face. Ragged, heavy, hot breathing. Thomas froze, not even daring to move his fingers. The sound was coming from the right, but when he hesitantly reached out, he found no one nearby. Suddenly, his breathing stopped completely, and a stifling silence fell over the room. Then, a faint sound echoed in the corner of the room, like the scratching of fingernails slowly scratching the floor. Thomas shuddered, his breathing quickened, and he tried to reach for his phone to light up the room, but he felt something touch his foot from under the bed. He jumped up suddenly, gasping for air, grabbing the phone and turning on the light. There was no one there, not on the floor, not under the bed, not in any corner of the room. Even the other bed was empty, and there was no sign of the young man he had seen hours earlier. Thomas sat in a daze, staring into space, unable to comprehend what was happening. For the first time since his arrival, he wished he were back in his village, sleeping in his narrow bed. But now he was trapped in a dark room, in a strange hotel, with ghosts he didn't know were real, or just nightmares that had just begun. Thomas sat on the bed, breathing heavily. What he had experienced last night was unusual, yet he had no proof that what he had seen was real. He felt that if he didn't prove to himself what was happening, he would soon lose his mind. He took his phone, carefully placed it on the wall opposite the bed, and positioned it so that it captured everything in the room. He turned off the light again and lay down, trying to sleep despite the tension that was engulfing him. Slowly, drowsiness overwhelmed him. The last thing he remembered before falling asleep was the phone's small red light blinking as it recorded. When the sun rose the next day, Thomas opened his eyes with a start, as if he had only slept for a few minutes. As soon as he remembered what he had done, he jumped out of bed and went straight to the phone. He sat on the floor, turned on the recording, and began watching. At first, the footage seemed ordinary, a dark room, complete silence, nothing moving. But minutes later, something appeared that made his blood run cold. A tall figure was standing at the door of the room. Much taller than any normal human, his body was unnaturally thin, and his face looked like a mass of burnt skin with no discernible features except for two sunken, glowing eyes. He didn't move for several long seconds, just staring at the bed where Thomas was sleeping, as if examining it. Then, suddenly, he disappeared from the camera as if he had never been there. Thomas was about to stop the video, but what followed was far worse. Around midnight, the door to the room slowly opened and his roommate entered. But he didn't look normal. He was wrapped in a dirty white shroud, like a corpse just lifted from the grave. His face was pale and expressionless, his eyes raised toward the ceiling in an inhuman way. He stood motionless beside Thomas's bed for several long seconds. Then he began to slowly bob his head up and down, as if struggling to keep it up. His movements were strange and painful to watch. Then he slowly bent down and crept under the bed where Thomas was sleeping, staying there until dawn. Thomas watched, trembling, his hand shaking so much that he nearly dropped the phone. He didn't dare look under the bed now. The thought that someone or something might still be there made him sweat. He turned off the phone with a sigh and sat silently, staring at the bed. The room seemed more cramped and cold than ever. For the first time in his life, he felt that sleep might be more dangerous than wakefulness. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed for long minutes, staring at the floor as he tried to muster his courage. The images he'd seen on his phone wouldn't leave his mind, and the cold he'd felt that night still gnawed at his bones. He took a deep breath, slowly bent down, and looked under the bed. Emptiness stared back at him. There was nothing, no sign of anyone or any movement. Yet his heart told him that what he'd seen wasn't an illusion. Thomas quickly got up, opened the door, and walked nervously down the corridor. He headed down the stairs toward the reception desk, his face pale and his hands trembling. When he arrived, he found the hotel owner sitting behind the desk, reading an old newspaper. The man raised his head in surprise when he saw Thomas dripping with sweat. Thomas said in a trembling voice, "Please, I have to change rooms. My roommate does scary things at night. I see him standing by my bed, acting like he's dead. I haven't slept all night." The innkeeper slowly raised his eyebrows, then smiled coldly. Thomas froze. The other guy, the one sleeping on the second bed. The man placed the newspaper on the table, looked directly into Thomas's eyes, and said, "Sir, the entire hotel is single rooms. We don't share rooms with strangers. The room we gave you has only one bed." Thomas trembled, almost screaming, "Impossible! I saw the bed with my own eyes, slept in it all night, greeted it, talked." The innkeeper stood with a heavy sigh and said coldly, "If you don't believe me, let's go and see for yourself." They climbed the stairs together, Thomas's heart pounding. He reached the room, pushed open the door with a trembling hand, and entered. The room was completely silent. Only one bed in the corner. On the other side of the room, there was no bed, only an old gray wall, as if the bed had never existed. Thomas felt as if he were falling into a black void. His legs could no longer carry him. The innkeeper said in a calm voice, as if to blame him, "You're tired, son. Travel and exhaustion make one imagine strange things. If you want, I'll change your room for you tonight. Maybe you'll sleep well." Thomas didn't reply. He stared at the spot where the bed had been the night before. He was absolutely certain he wasn't imagining things. The same smell, the same blanket, even the sound of his roommate's breathing. Everything was real. The innkeeper left the room, leaving Thomas in the heavy silence. He sat on the bed, his hands over his face, his mind boiling with a million questions. Who had seen him? Who had entered the room that night? And if there hadn't been a bed, where had everything disappeared? At that moment, he felt a sudden chill in the room, as if something had passed behind him. He quickly raised his head, but found no one. Yet, he was convinced that the room was no longer as empty as it seemed. The next day, Thomas decided to accept the hotel owner's offer and change rooms. He carried his small suitcase and headed to the next floor where the new room was. This time, he found only one bed, as the hotel owner had told him, and felt a little reassured. He placed his luggage on the bed and took a deep breath, as if leaving the previous night's nightmare behind. He spent some time in the room before going out to walk around the hotel. The long corridors and peeling paint on the walls made the place look like it had witnessed a century of secrets. As he walked, he noticed a man in his 30s sitting on one of the wooden benches in the corner of the corridor, his head bowed as if in deep thought. Thomas approached him and sat beside him. "Have you ever felt anything unusual here?" Thomas asked cautiously. The man raised his head and looked at him with a faint smile. "No, why are you asking?" Thomas sighed, as if he had been waiting for a while to vent. He began to tell the man everything that had happened to him. The two-bedroomed room, the mysterious roommate, the tall shadow near the door, the recording on the phone, and even the man wrapped in a shroud who had hidden under his bed. The man listened in complete silence, his eyes fixed on Thomas. When he finished his story, the man said in a quiet voice, "You know, the room I was in isn't an ordinary room. It's famous in the hotel because 3 people were killed there." Thomas's heart trembled. 3? The man nodded. "Yes, 2 young men lived in the room years ago. One was tall, and the other was his best friend. No one knows what happened between them that night, but they died together, as if one of them had killed the other and then himself. A few years later, a 3rd man had died in the same room in a mysterious way. It's said that his spirit never left the hotel." Thomas felt his breath quicken. "That explains why the tall figure was watching me, and why that man wrapped in a shroud had gotten under my bed." Suddenly, the words caught in his throat. He slowly turned his head toward the man and said in a low voice, "Wait, how did you know that the tall figure was standing by the door, and that the young man wrapped in a shroud hid under my bed?" At that, A slow, distorted smile spread across the man's face. Inhuman. Then, in a deep voice, as if coming from deep within the earth, he said, "Because I'm the third person to die in that room." Thomas's blood froze, and his heart felt like it stopped beating for a few seconds. Before he could move, the man stood up, entered the next room, and slammed the door behind him so hard that the walls shook. Thomas ran to his room, gathered his belongings in a fit of panic, and then ran downstairs. He didn't wait for the night. He paid the price for the days he had spent and left the hotel early in the morning. He didn't look back once. He boarded the first bus to his village and sat by the window, holding back his tears and nearly vomiting from the intensity of his terror. He said to himself in a low voice, "I'll stay in my village, work and live there. It's better for me than to die here with their ghosts." From that day on, Thomas never went near the city again. The hotel had become a nightmare for him that time would never erase, as if he had left a part of his soul in that cursed room. I'm tired. Anyway, thus ends the story of Thomas, a young man who entered an old hotel thinking he'd found the cheapest place to stay. Little did he know that this hotel harbors spirits still trapped behind its walls. What do you think? Was Thomas lucky to survive and return to his village, or should he have stayed to learn more about the secret of the haunted room? Write your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to support us with a like and subscribe to the channel, because what's coming will be even scarier. And also, this is Instagram. Follow me and share your scary story, and I'll post it on YouTube. See you, horror gang!